Yeah.
Okay, and if let me see if things work. Okay, let me see if I can. All right. I interviewed J. John Ikenberry to talk about his latest book, A World Safe for Democracy, Liberal Internationalism and the Crisis of Global Order. 10 years ago, I wrote a piece on world safe and the crisis of American foreign policy, Wilsonianism in the 21st Century, edited by him with Thomas Nock, Anna Marie Slaughter, and Tony Smith. I wrote a extensive piece in Spanish, which I'm happy to make available for new policy in translation if you're interested. So here we are, moving from crisis in the singular to crisis in the plural. But since we are in the international relations domain, crisis is always a very, very good thing. If there's no crisis, there's no business. Strictly Come Anglo, the highlight of the long interview that I managed to put together with John Ikenberry, and I had to do some James Bond theatrics, and I pulled my connections, constructs a two-century liberal narrative of Anglo-American supremacy, or leadership, or world order, if you wish, that is now admittedly in dire straits, if not becoming something else. Ikenberry is the one who coins the terminology of liberal internationalism. We are in this type of domain, international relations or foreign affairs. We are in those fields, in the social sciences, and the historicism is narrow institutionalist, and the perspectivism is US statist, and in this case, obviously, the state has a superpower status. The historicism and the perspectivism, asphyxiatingly narrow and insufficient, but this is my evaluation. He would never say it is such because it's quite the opposite. He's engaging with world order, no more, no less than the world, the biggest possible concept he can think of. This is a repeated narrative of Anglo-white men. The book, but also it comes out in the interview. This is a repeated narrative of Anglo-white men in professional circles in the vicinity of the government. There is the US fundamentally, with a bit of the UK, but it's a docile UK. It's a subservient UK domain, setting up for us what good life is about, politically, socially, culturally. Might, what is at the bottom is might. Might is right and comes with proper knowledge. We could use a terminology that is not really used often, or one of enlightened despotism. The ones in power are the ones who know and the ones who enlighten the rest of the world. It's a superpower democracy, the one delivering the goods to the big category of world. A world safe for democracy is Woodrow Wilson's line, and pay attention to the safe bit because that is really what he's up to. He's recycling Woodrow Wilson's famous slogan, and in this case, the ideal within the international relations domain, within the US, everything is internal to that domain. The whole debate or dialogue between the so-called idealist and realist, in this case, Ikenberry, as an idealist, as a Wilsonian or neo-Wilsonian, is turning a realist. The safe or safety is really the value that he's defending. So what world is this? And safe for whom? What does safe mean? Is democracy really interrogated? Liberal internationalism. Ikenberry, in this type of phrasing, this type of branding, doesn't really, it's all about the reification of language and thought. It's more of a slogan. It's more of a shibboleth. It's more of, if I use this type of language, my allies and those with me will be using that language. I don't really have to go deep into explaining really what that means. It's an insistence on my signs for my group to recognize. Those who will use the same sign will be with me, and those who don't are not with me. This is the good thing that we do, and the others do the bad thing. The illiberal, whenever we see liberal, authoritarian, techno democracy, within our sectors, to a less degree, the realists as well. Whenever we see that type of language, we know that we are setting up a conflictual political dichotomy. So it's a Manichaean, at the bottom, it's a Manichaean, it's a providentialist, even though liberalism is a narrative of secularism. The secularity of the narrative doesn't make it any better. There's a political theology that is being articulated in Ikenberry. So whose global order? Well, obviously the American one. Of course, that is now, in all appearances, slipping away. So that is not good. Hence, crisis in plural. And the mindset is one that there's no crisis that you cannot profit from. Ikenberry's language is the one now used by Biden and Blinken. We still lead by democracy. Democracy is a moment of democracy repair, it's a restoration, it's multilateralism to a certain extent. There's a talk of human rights, or the weaponizing of human rights, and they're talking tough against the Chinese and the Russians. Remember the Anchorage, Alaska, March 2021 meeting. The Princeton scholar externalizes a few political ideas or ideals in the manner of a state counselor to the American Leviathan. This is, by the way, one of his books, The American Leviathan. Liberal International is really acting like a stalking horse. He says, to give, in the interview with me, he says to give gravitas to the tradition of American liberalism and no liberalism. I should tell you as an anecdote that in the title of one section in the interview, I called him a neoliberal, and he didn't like that. So language and thought can be reified and defended as a brand very, very quickly, and they will be resisting any change to the brand. So Ikenberry, in his own words, he's no neoliberal. So why is this internationalism? What does that mean? Well, explicitly multilateralism. But if you get closer, in the book, in the interview comes out very quickly, there's no one single instance of learning from, borrowing, or adopting of foreign provenance knowledge. Everything good, call it liberal, is internally American. And by American, we need to specify it's a very narrow, white Anglo-American in the vicinity of power, mostly in his case, Democratic Party circles, with the occasional collaboration with the Republicans. There are projects in which Princeton, particularly during the Trump era, Princeton and the Hoover Institution collaborated. So again, idealists and realists, they do collaborate from time to time when there are moments of insurgency, particularly during the Trump era. We are dealing with a mitigated, modulated xenophobia towards the English. The book cover says it very quickly. We have an image of St. Paul during the Blitz. But again, you're not going to see in the book or in the thought a more insurgent England or a more contestatory. You should remember that during the Iraq War, Britain has a tremendous anti-war movement and a record number of people in the streets protesting the Bush-Blair war. So, but that England is not really going to be included in Ikenberry's train of thought. But vastly, I would push it further. There's a xenophobia that, of course, is very politely internalized and included, because the figure of the foreign in a supposedly internationalist thought process, the figure of the foreign is no knowledge carrier. So what type of scholar is this? I do not doubt to call it, this knowledge production, a chauvinism and a jingoism, no matter how soft and polite the diction. There's a clear case of epistemicide. The non-US domain is not welcome to the knowledge party. And this is like, again, in the interview is quite clear. If you look at the book, which is quite a thick book, you will see that no foreign actor, domain, collectivity will be placing any type of knowledge counter to what he's trying to defend. So is Ikenberry aware of his own perspectivism? You will see in the interview with me, no. He doesn't even understand the notion of perspectivism. His subject position is a superpower universalist without major regrets or heavy contritions or compunctions. If we take down the name of Wilson from the School of International Affairs because he happens to be a historical racist, we still use his inspirational word with a twist towards safety. So this, of course, there's going to be, in the course of the book, there's going to be some admission of Woodrow Wilson's limitations, but we continue down this road. If in the interview he says, if Woodrow Wilson sinks, Ikenberry, swims. Really? Let me tell you a joke, because he's probably, you're probably already thinking about lunch. Imagine that I'm talking to you about Corleone, and I start talking to you, and I say that he wears really good suits, that he's really funny when he talks, that he even has a great collection of anecdotes. He's a businessman. And in the course of the conversation, I happen to mention to you that he did some killing too. But I go back and see how he was very beneficial to his neighborhood and his community. Now, I suppose that you or I will instantly think, well, but this guy's complicit with Corleone. This guy is vindicating Corleone. Particularly if I show you photos of Corleone, if I give you, and I give him an awful lot of light in the chorus line. That is what Ikenberry is doing now with Woodrow Wilson. He will admit in a passing sentence to his racism. But again, his handling of Woodrow Wilson will not take account, for example, Du Bois, will not take account Maynard Keynes, will not take account at that time, if you're only going to go to elite centers of power and privilege, he will not tell us what the French thought of him. So again, that is typical modus operandi of Ikenberry in the book, but in general, in this type of thinking. This liberal West. So the position adopted in the book is that of the West. But this is not a richly historical, deep time civilizational, a la Toynbee, Arnold Toynbee, the English historian. There's no need to give the microphone to foreign historians in the West of the rest. The adjective in this international relations circles is, you guessed it, liberal. So liberal West, it refers to the American and English, but let's say speaking position, the who I am. And then remember the use of the allies, but it's certainly a very narrow conception of West, a civilizational, mega historical category to be sure here, and in the book, in the interview, that comes out in a very restricted, think of a privileged jockey club, if you wish. There's a social science, nomothetic simplification of the civilizational mega entity, which becomes a rather pitiful and portable history, only insofar as it's useful to American hegemony pursuits in Ikenberry's narrative. In that parenthesis, think about the following, which I hope is not too trite or too silly. We are those circles are already paying attention to we've been celebrating the 75-year-old famous Kennan telegram. And in the interview, Ikenberry pretty much calls the Cold War the golden age of US supremacy. Ikenberry is 66 years old. If you look at someone like Richard Haas in the Council on Foreign Relations, he's 70 years old. So the individual lifetime of these two essentially influential individuals, the individual lifetime coincides with the global leadership of the superpower nation. So when they're looking at the future in the next, let's say, decade, they're thinking, well, I'm going out, and the nation, the superpower status of the nation is also going out with me. So obviously they don't like it. Liberal West, insofar as the US is number one, and clearly the horror of becoming number two, as though history was some kind of Olympic Games. Ikenberry is walking on the white side. White are the fundamental producers of knowledge. White supremacists by active will or by default. There's no methodological focus on race and ethnicity, of course not. But Ikenberry operates within the privileged male white side of the global color line, projecting a little bit of London from the privileged East Coast Ivy League setting, overlooking Europe and the world. Not even the French or the Germans are invited. You would have thought that, okay, if I'm going to be talking about Europe, I'm not only going to include one or two British individuals. I'll include the occasional French and the occasional German. France is a nuclear superpower. Germany is the biggest economy. no one single instance of those. I mean, if Spaniards or Polish or Italians are not included, that's already the norm, but not even the powerful one. So there's a nationalistic methodology and a natural Eurocentrism, Anglo-American modulated. The ideal defended, the social security model of global society, what in Europe is called the social democratic model. This is the model that is now clearly being eroded as we speak, and it's probably on its way out. There's the expansion of rights, but there's no analysis of political economy. There's no development of competing ideologies. There's little naming. The word capitalism is barely mentioned. So this is largely unnamed capitalism with a conscience, with a human face. And please read irony in those expressions in quotation marks, defending the gradual. Someone like Ikenberry would say, I'm a Democrat, and by that he means I'm into reform. I'm into reform of existing democracy and capitalism, but without getting too specific about both notions. There's an English monolingual disposition and everything that comes with it. London is the projection of London is mostly a projection of Washington. There's no need for philosophies or history. This is history redux. There's no need for metaphysics. There's no telos other than the US number one. Sub specie aeternitatis. This is Latin for liberal US until the bitter end of time. Philosophy of history, pardon? Certainly not in the grand European continental tradition. What Ikenberry is doing, he's updating Lewis Hart with a touch of Samuel Huntington, for whom, in his essay on conservatism is mostly institutionalism. So if there's noise in the street, if there's commotion and upheaval, a conservative doesn't really need big notions of history or philosophy or anything like that. A conservative is a institutionalist. So someone like Ikenberry does exactly that in 2021, calling himself liberal. And remember, he doesn't like the neo. He's borrowing from Tooze and Hermitage, and check out where they're coming from. These are two Brits in the Ivy Leagues. So those are the two proper historians giving him the narrow vision of history that he really wants. He's not even discreet. He's not even subtle. International relations doesn't do philosophy. That is just what the humanists do, but it's just not useful. It's history of useful ideas without crossfire. There's in the book and in the interview. There's no political economy. There's no compare and contrast. There's no ideological give and take with other Americans. There's less so with the rest of the world competitors who are simply not there. That acronym, that Q acronym, is used in international relations. Rest of the world. So what world then? This world is res extensa, not res cogitans. Again, Latin for the rest of the world is subaltern to our thought and belief in the American dream, now shaken. The rest of the world doesn't think. We are the one thinking. And we are the ones who think, generate knowledge, and we are going to appropriate. When that appropriation is now not happening, that's when the problem kicks in. That problem already has been in place at least for a decade. It's no longer. There's zero transculturation. And I'm using the formula of the well-known formula of the Cuban anthropologist Fernando Ortiz. But transculturation, this is no mixture. Someone like Ikenberry, he's not going to mix. He's not going to mix with that. Certainly, he's not going to be talking with Tink Tinker. So there's no mixture. There's no interdisciplinarity. History matters only insofar as it gives guidance to solve the present pressures or situations. History is not allowed to be a serious challenge to who he says he is. Ikenberry sees himself in the mirror of his superpower nation and vice versa. So this is the American hubris in this world order. The universe is only one. The identity chain is unbroken in the book and the interview. By identity, I mean a series of equals, or call it identification process. Ikenberry, I am my superpower nation. I am the conduit or vehicle of this providentialist type of IR knowledge that seeks to find the leverage of the force multiplier, call it world, out there. There's a brutal lack of proportionality. Think of it. The US and the rest of the world. Almost like they're not exactly similar dimensions, but when you think about it, the latter dimension, I get no knowledge, but I cannot emphasize this enough. I get zero knowledge from that rest of the world domain aspect of the universe. There's nothing comes from that otherness. So it's almost like the rest of the world is a Caliban world, and Ikenberry is a Prospero, for whom this thing of darkness, I suppose, he would like to say, I acknowledge mine in the sense of possession, in the sense of I wanted to do what I wanted to do. So his is a methodological nationalism, and his core, as I mentioned, 1950 USA in Cold War beginnings. His, the bald eagles, bird's eye view, drone, or even better, satellite vision of global history, as captured by superpower American history in the last 75 years. Obviously, we're dealing with a university state conglomerate. In the language of the conference, the Western cognitive empire, all-American Ivy League empire, or hegemony leadership post-Trump Biden administration. And it's a dramatic moment for the US. How am I doing with time? I cannot see you. Is it okay?
We have 10 minutes left in your presentation.
All right, okay, wonderful, wonderful. So this is the moment of the Biden and the Blinken administration, the institutionalist moment after the insurrectionist period. We are in the moment of the repair mission. When you think about it, this is almost like a moment of gerontocracy in the perennially young and proud country in the new world. Biden is 78 and Trump was 74. Is this a restoration period? As I mentioned before, a period of enlightened despotism. We always know best. It's an attempt to build up a transatlanticism and acknowledge, of course, some issues of racial inequality, whilst continue talking leadership against the Chinese and the Russians. And probably the new center of the world system will be what is the US Indian Pacific Command. Big crisis of credibility of the US internally and externally. We can speak of an internal Western civilizational crisis on both sides of the Atlantic, US and the UK with top COVID deaths, the UK top COVID deaths in Europe, but the US top COVID deaths in the world vis-a-vis China. So clearly this is one symptom that something is very wrong. Obviously, I don't have to tell you, you live this up close. Race and ethnicity explosion, Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, the 6th January assault on Congress. So how on earth is the US going to export what to whom, typically with little or no say of those others in most institutions and the conventional media? I'm going to skip this because it was a temptation that I have about to include the dialogue between those two, Toynbee and Ortega y Gasset, which already in the 30s and the 40s, they spoke of the West as the schism of the soul and the chronic illegitimacy of open modernity in the context of the Roman Empire and the West, losing faith and belief in this, in the exercise of Roman public law. Why do I mention Toynbee? Because you will remember some of those names. Toynbee, as a historian of civilizations and big scope of visions of the world, he was, if I may put it this way, Americanized and bastardized by figures such as other historians, but also people in the IR domain, like Donald Kagan, father of Robert Kagan, and none other than Samuel P. Huntington in the Clash of Civilizations. The whole debate of the 80s, the West of the canon, the culture wars, the Rigoberta Menchú testimonial literature, the emergence of theory, cultural studies, subaltern studies, post-decolonial studies, the boom of Latin American literature, the legacy of the civil rights and the Vietnam War. This is the immediate context in which, particularly in the context of the US, this is where I think some of the issues that we've been talking about must be contextualized. And now, Ikenberry remains beatifically oblivious and negligent of those internal legacies and debates. He's not going to look inward to the complexities of his own society. He's going to, again, his internationalism is externalizing of conflict and problems and always setting up a illiberal order that he'll be reacting against. His style, not to look too deep into internal matters. He sticks his gun to the IR and looks out. He does not mix with other disciplines, even less with foreign provenance knowledge. Is he going to expand horizons of otherness and difference? No. Is he going to learn foreign languages? Are you joking? It's all about the export of this, what he calls global knowledge. If we have to find some fault in Wilson, of course we do, but his words still remain inspirational. The focus on the safety, as he calls it in my interview. It's almost like he's looking at a dear friend at the hospital who's ailing and he's holding his hand. That's liberalism. So we're dealing with a defense mechanism. There's the circling of the wagons. There's no plan B, except strictly come Anglo and the US on top. IR always needs crisis, or better, crises in plural. I'm going to skip the English connection in the interest of time, but obviously, let me just say very quickly, London is a great launching platform for Ikenberry. He will move through Chatham House, the London School of Economics, and he will use the language that will find an echo in Britain. In today's respectable paper, The Times, the main headline is West condemns malign Russia. So there you have a typical Ikenberry move. The US, they don't say the US, the Financial Times say the US, but the Times, they call it the West. So in brutal metonymic fashion, the West is acting like a stalking horse, like some kind of a smoke screen for the subject position that is aggressively intervening in the global context against always the bad guys, in this case, the Russians. Let me just skip that. I would like to emphasize that we need to be a little bit careful with the big units like the West, rest, Europe, Eurocentrism. I want to echo a little bit, and remember please that I'm sympathetic, but I need to, when we're talking so quickly about Europe or even about Christianity, we need to be a little bit careful with that type of terminology. Because for example, let me just give you one example. When we talk about Europe, are we talking about, particularly when we're using terminology like we want to delink from the West, or Europe? Which Europe are we talking about? Are we talking Western Europe, the EU, NATO, the geostrategic post-Cold War Europe, the US, which is a US European command? Are we talking about this or that influential nation or institution? The North, South, East, West Europe, the Mediterranean localities, the Nordic countries, the Balkans, the Visegrad group? Are we talking about Brexit Britain? Is Russia part of Europe? Is Turkey? Are we talking about the legacy of this or that religion or traditions, the history of migrations into the US, or the Europe that is constructed by Americans to keep other localities in some distance? So we deal with institutional webs and many subjects doing many things. Let me close down with the following, and I'm trying to, I want to Americanize this conference, but also some of the thoughts that I've been talking about. By Americanize, I mean, in the Henry James sense of the term, to bring it close to the US, our favorite country, not the only country in the world, but we need to understand that vast transformations are taking place. And there's going to be a very, very complicated situation in the following decades, if not the following centuries. The US is undergoing a de-Westernizing and a de-Europeanizing process. There's the weakening of the Eurocentric matrix of dominant groups. Call it tilt or pivot to Asia, which is basically China. So perhaps we're all going to need a new compass. Perhaps we're witnessing a gradual imperial decline that some analysts call terminal. We're dealing with a Latinization or Hispanization of the American population. Call it becoming brown. We're dealing with a majority-minority nation, increasingly a majority-minority nation, and the impact on the world of institutions and the street. Remember the formula of the challenges to the American national cultural identity formula? That is Huntington formula. Well, remember that? All those challenges are going to be activated at the highest level of geopolitical level, all the way to the street level, to the way we walk in the streets, to the way we eat, to the music we listen to the languages we use. The US is becoming less white. So it's going to be a triple blow. Less, number one, less white, less European centered. Also crisis of the institutions, responding to the tremendous challenges taking place in American society, even processes of deinstitutionalization, institutions not responding adequately to social pressures and social transformations. I don't have to tell you, you know this better than me from up close, that we are dealing now moments of insurgencies, disobedience, and in the formula of Ortega y Gasset, the revolt of the masses. Remember that that formula was used already 100 years ago. We're dealing with the crisis of the neoliberal corporate model of capitalist society. COVID impact now, moving away from the social security models of basic rights coverage. How is the university coping? Crisis of the corporate neoliberal model. Who recognizes it? Knowledge is coming from where exactly? Tell me what the state of the humanities, of the liberal arts. Is the assimilation model, a nation of immigrants in the US, a nation of immigrants, really, really in question? What about English monolingualism? Still the norm. So we're dealing with the are we dealing with the insularity, an increase of the American insularity from larger vistas? Or perhaps turning towards a great appreciation of more situated knowledges. The Trump shock is or was a symptom of larger forces embedded in the US. I'll skip some of the transformations in the UK, but I'm happy to make my slides available to other people. And I hope that you understand. I'm a dual citizen. Okay, so I'm an American citizen, believe it or not. And I gave 20 years of my life to the US, so I have a skin in the game. So don't see this as castigating the US, please. I'm trying to understand processes in the US that is part of me, whether I like it or not. Vast transformations happening in the UK, and I do see, I'm happy to say this on the record, I do not see Europe better prepared than the US to countenance some of those vast transformations. The UK is in a profound disorientation at the moment with Brexit Britain, with the four-nation tension, the conventional ties to the US and the EU. No feelings anymore.
Now we're out of time.
Yes,
yeah, we have to move on to the next one.
Absolutely. So
can you email me PowerPoint? I'll put it up on our website so everybody can have easy access.
I'll be happy to do that. Yes, I'll be happy to do that. Let me just see if I get out of. Can you see me now? Am I out? Okay. I'll be happy to. I'll be happy to make this available to the participants, and if you want to get in touch with me, I'm happy to follow up. I could not see your faces while I was talking. I was just reading the slides. I hope it came across more or less in some coherent fashion. Thank you for your interest.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. We're going to take a lunch break now. We've had a long morning. Our earlier presenter who missed it, got his time zones mixed up. That was Ricardo Frias, the University of Argonne, and we're going to go back to the original schedule, which we had posted about a week or two ago, where the conference actually ran till 4 p.m. time with the closing remarks at 3:30 rather than 3. So Ricardo, who looks like an interesting paper, will be presenting at 3 o'clock Colorado time, or whatever time zone that is in here. So everybody take a break. I'll scramble here. I'll get Ricardo's, get Fernando, if you could send it to me right now, I'll get it up right now.
I've sent my my slides to everyone. So there you have lots of information. Thank you. I think let me know if you can read the stuff, and my contact information is there. My email is also there. So you have everything there.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you.